In January of 2022, reports started making the rounds that Ghost of Tsushima had officially sold more than 8 million units since its launch, and everyone was quick to acknowledge this as a well-deserved accomplishment for a universally beloved game. Then a single tweet shifted the entire conversation. Jeff Ross of Bend Studio expressed discontent that a Sony first-party title he had directed called Days Gone was labeled a disappointment and had its planned sequel cancelled despite its sales reaching that very same 8 million figure. Many fans of Days Gone quickly latched onto this, upset by the clear and obvious double standards at work, only for Jeff to clarify he wasn't basing those numbers on raw data but a now-defunct trophy tracking site, so his claim wasn't exactly the most accurate. Regardless of what the actual sales are, all this got me thinking about Days Gone again, enough to actually boot it up for a replay for the first time since release, and 35 hours later, I kinda want to talk about it. I don't think this will come as some hard-hitting evaluation for most of you, but Days Gone is not a masterpiece. It was far from being one when it first came out in 2019, and it still isn't one now. The game has some major flaws, and it doesn't really do any one thing exceptionally well, but that doesn't mean it's a failure either. It's the very definition of a jack-of-all-trades. I might be skinned alive for saying this, but as far as I'm concerned, all the critics that scored Days Gone a 6 or 7 out of 10 at launch were right on the money. I know a lot of us are conditioned to see those kind of scores as bad, but they aren't, or at least they're not supposed to be. They more represent average, decent, flawed, and yeah, those descriptors fit this experience to a T. You and I have definitely played better than this, but you can still have a good time if you go in with the right expectations and are willing to overlook a fair amount of jank. Days Gone is an open-world action-adventure game set in a zombie apocalypse. Oh, right. Sorry. Freaker apocalypse, and if you've ever played a modern-day open-world game, the structure will be incredibly familiar. There are outpost equivalents to take over, upgrade and lore collectibles to find, and actually, that's sort of all there is. There are no wacky side activities to take part in. At any given moment, you're either driving around on your motorcycle because, for some reason, every single person in this world exclusively uses motorcycles, or murdering whatever raiders or freakers get in your way. Combat is basically all you do, and it falls into a recognizable loop. Stealth is the same against both humans and freakers, being the usual hide in bushes and backstab you've seen 100 times. Although when going loud, fights do feel different enough between the two groups to stand apart from each other. When a posse of marauders is aggroed, Days Gone is a standard cover shooter. A handful of suicidal melee guys charge at you while everyone else hides behind knee-high walls and you pop them in the head whenever they stand up. Rinse and repeat. Dealing with an aggroed group of infected, however, is much more frantic. They rush at you non-stop, forcing you to stay mobile and pick your shots, especially early on when you're at your weakest, making even a small group of 10 feel like a significant threat. The flip-flopping between these two encounter styles helps keep the shooting from falling into a familiar tedium for a bit longer than you might usually expect, though it definitely gets there eventually once the headshot dopamine starts to have diminishing returns. Days Gone has a progression of power as you play, but it's not a smooth curve. In fact, the game doesn't actually make the best first impression. You're pretty fragile, your stamina drains quickly, you don't have the focus ability, which slows down time when aiming, and when you do get it, it only lasts a couple seconds. Your guns are weak, you can't carry much ammo, and driving around on your bike isn't very exciting. I know more than one person that bounced off this game after only a few hours because they weren't enjoying themselves. But as you keep playing, you do feel the tables start to turn in your favor. Your bike slowly transforms from a slow, stiff-to-handle, gas-guzzling scooter to a high-speed, tight-turning chopper with built-in fuel-efficient fetus. From earning skill points and tracking down injectors in the world that raise your base stats, you'll be able to tank more hits, run for long stretches, wipe out entire groups with just one pop of slow-mo, and have access to high-powered weapons with huge magazine sizes. You go from a weakling at the beginning of the game to a one-man army. The problem is that these significant power increases happen pretty far apart. You'll just be getting by for the first 8 hours or so, at which point you'll have made decent skill progress and be able to buy good automatic weapons. But once you get those, you're basically coasting for the next 15 hours. Nothing is really a threat to you anymore, other than hordes, which the game still hasn't properly introduced you to yet, and when you eventually acquire the means to deal with them, there's nothing else to get. This causes long stretches of the game, especially in the middle, to kind of blend together, lacking any standout encounters or moments other than what happens in the story. Speaking of the story, it's okay, I guess. It has all the familiar tropes you'd expect. Our protagonist, Deacon St. John, is an angry drifter that hates everything, only to have his cold, icy heart melt away as he learns to care again. There's a crazy cult group, a crazy military group, you've seen all this before. All the characters you run into are fine, none of them are bad, but none are going to be remembered as iconic either. Like, there's enough chemistry between all these people that I buy their relationships, but I'm also not that invested in how they ultimately turn out. There are also contrivances made in order to force a connection between our lead and other plot points, and they seem unnecessary. Spoilers ahead for those of you that care, so skip to this timestamp if you want to avoid them. So when Deke gets captured by the Rippers, the cult group that enjoys cutting themselves because reasons, their leader shows up and reveals himself to be Oh my god, it's Jesse! I can't believe Jesse is the one behind all this! Who the fuck is Jesse? Oh, he's a disgraced member of Deacon's old motorcycle club that has not been seen nor mentioned before this, so this reveal holds no weight. And you deal with him less than 2 hours later, so why even bother with this? It adds nothing, just have him be some random insane guy. Also, in the very first flashback that shows how Deke and his wife Sarah met, she tells him she's a researcher in a nearby lab.
The company that I work for, they opened this lab here, so here I came to the middle of nowhere.
I can't be the only one that drew the obvious conclusion the instant she said that, and yeah, sure enough, her being involved in the supervirus's creation is supposed to be some grand reveal. Wow, Deke, you sure know how to pick 'em. Also, look, Freakers is a dumb name. Like, calling these things freaks as a nickname I get, and I guess they're not technically undead, so zombie doesn't fit either, but Freakers? Really? The acting is solid from all involved, no one is doing a poor job. Really, the only deliveries that stood out to me as kinda shaky were from Deacon himself, specifically whenever you're taking out a hostile encampment. He'll mumble under his breath about how these guys are assholes and he's gonna enjoy killing them, and while I don't think the delivery is bad per se, Sam Witwer, who plays Deacon, is a good actor. To me, it just sounds like acting.
Oh yeah, how do you like that, huh? Okay, time for the rest of you.
I get it, they're trying to portray Deke as a little unhinged because of all he's seen and done to survive, but it's like the voice director kept saying, no, more intense, and they ended up going one step too far. The narrative's biggest problem overall, though, is its pacing. The entire first third of the game is basically pointless, meandering around as you do busy work for the first two camps. It's not until you get to the third camp, Lost Lake, that substantial story stuff starts happening, and after a dozen hours or so there, just when it feels like things should be wrapping up, surprise, there's a whole nother third of the map and an entire new faction to deal with, and by that point, Days Gone has overstayed its welcome. This pacing issue really sticks out in all of the cutscenes. It's clear that Ben's studio had tons of ambition for this project, but had to start cutting stuff out and cramming together what they had to meet their release deadline. Some of you may not know this, but in one of the early showcases for Days Gone, they showed off a moral choice system that is completely missing from the final product. It's also obvious they didn't have time to optimize how things flowed. This game loves its fades to black. There are tons of scenes that start, go on for a while, fade to black, load for a bit, then fade back in to either continue the scene you were just watching or force you into a scripted walk and talk segment, fade out again, load into another scene, which ultimately ends with, you guessed it, a fade out. Other games have seamless transitions between their story moments and gameplay, but Days Gone doesn't, and it really stands out, which makes the presentation feel pretty sloppy. There's actually a lot about the game that feels sloppy. For the record, I replayed Days Gone on PS5, which aims for 60 frames per second, and that immediately makes it feel way better. When it launched on PS4, the game was aiming for 30, and it missed a lot of the time. It was kind of a mess. But now, things are way smoother. Not perfect, I still had somewhat regular hitches and stutters when driving around. I'm guessing because the game has to load what's in front of you, but when you're on foot and fighting guys, everything runs fine. Even with that improvement, though, you won't be able to play for long without running into some kind of bug. Environmental details are always popping in. Sometimes the high-res textures won't load, making everyone and thing look like they're melting. NPCs, whether they be human, freaker, or bird, get stuck on even the smallest pieces of geometry. Every so often, subtitles will randomly stop appearing. Radio calls you get while driving around will play out of order, so Deacon will discuss something he hasn't actually been told yet, only to have the introductory dialogue play later. Tutorial prompts for basic mechanics will appear suddenly, even though you've been doing said mechanic for 20 hours. And one time, I had a freaker horde spawn on top of me during a non-interactive moment, which ended up devouring me shortly after I regained control. Aside from that last one, these issues are generally harmless, but they show off a lack of polish and effectively convey that Days Gone desperately needed more time in the oven. However, despite all of its issues, there is one aspect of Days Gone that is universally praised by all. It was the main thing highlighted in the marketing, and it is absolutely the most fun part of the game. Let's talk about hordes. Taking on hordes is great. Watching this tsunami of infected relentlessly charge at you, nipping at your heels the whole time as you scramble looking for brief moments of calm to chip away at their numbers, all while knowing full well that one mistake, one slip-up will allow this wave of death to swallow you whole. It's intense, it's engaging, it kicks ass. There's no better visual in the world than dumping rounds into a mass of napalm-covered freakers. Fighting these hordes is the best part of Days Gone, hands down. But these standout encounters also come with their share of issues. First off, as far as the story is concerned, these hordes may as well not exist. No one pays them much mind, no one treats them as a threat, there's never a concern that one is coming to overwhelm a settlement or something, they're just sort of there. Second, the game holds this standout gameplay feature extremely close to its chest. Despite these frantic skirmishes being the main selling point of the game, the story doesn't actually have you fighting a horde until, give or take, 30 hours in, long past the point where the gameplay of Days Gone has started to feel stale. Sure, hordes wander the open world, and you can accidentally run into them while going about your business. These moments are an adrenaline shot for sure, but these instances are sporadic. There's a difference between saving the best for last and holding the best hostage until you've done all your chores. I don't think the game should be throwing these set pieces at you right away, but pepper some throughout the campaign, having the horde size escalate as it goes, because as it is now, a lot of players are never going to experience the best content in the game. Finally, although dealing with hordes is fun, not all horde fights are created equal. In fact, the 3 best horde fights in the game are the mandatory ones found in the story. These have you dealing with these huge groups, hundreds strong, and take place in specific arenas with various paths and traps laid out to maximize damage. After these 3 excellent battles, the rest are endgame open-world activities that lack the same inventiveness. A lot just have you running circles in a field. And while there are 40 hordes in total, which sounds like a lot, they vary in size, with many being so small they can be wiped out in less than 30 seconds. Each horde encounter ended up becoming less and less special until I eventually reached a point where I had had my fill, so I left plenty of them undisturbed. I mean, it's not like they're hurting anybody. Days Gone isn't a great game. In fact, it's really easy to see how one could not like it at all. Its structure is tired, especially in a genre as saturated as open world is. Its core gameplay loop doesn't do much to differentiate itself. The story meanders along for extended periods and relies on familiar tropes, it lacks overall polish, and its standout feature is put behind dozens of hours of busy work. But, I don't know, there's something about Days Gone that leaves me with overall positive vibes. It has solid enough fundamentals that I was never unhappy playing it. A bit bored at times, sure, but never so much that I was left miserable or desperate to put my controller down. That's not glowing praise, I know, and if you compare it to other Sony first-party monoliths like God of War, Ratchet & Clank, or Uncharted, its issues can't help but be magnified, but look, I think Days Gone is alright. I always had a hard time recommending it at full price, but nowadays when it's like 30 to 40 bucks, I think you'll get your money's worth. I end up seeing this game as kinda like junk food. It's not the best thing you could be eating, but there's a baseline enjoyment to be had as long as you don't go in expecting a gourmet meal. I do hope someday Bend Studio is given the chance to make the sequel that they wanted to, where they're able to polish up their vision, tighten the pacing, smooth out the technical issues, and holy shit, imagine how much bigger the hordes could be on more powerful hardware. The IP's future is uncertain for the time being, but as far as its debut goes, Days Gone is an overly long, somewhat rough, but generally enjoyable ride. And I got through this entire video without making a sex joke about my title.